Iceland, a land of fire, ice, and some of the most influential stories throughout history. From oral tradition to written sagas, and finally modern adaptations. The evolution of Icelandic storytelling is a timeline of artistic transformation. But how did we get from this?
So Orville went to Kveldulf and told him that the king was wrath, and it would not go well unless one of the two, father or son, came to the king.
To this.
Thor? Can you see me?
Floating hit alert.
In this video, we're breaking down the history of Icelandic sagas. This is not a complete comprehensive timeline of all of the Icelandic sagas. This is a brief timeline of the sagas I found to be most important and worth highlighting, tracing their journey through time and exploring how they still shape modern media. The oral tradition. 8th to 10th century. Before sagas were written down, they were passed from generation to generation through spoken word. This era, from roughly 870 to 1050, is known as the Saga Age. The Norse settlers who arrived in Iceland brought their myths, legends, and heroic tales, shaping an oral tradition that would eventually influence literature and art. During this time, the stories were fluid, evolving with each telling. As Icelandic society transformed, settlements grew, chieftains rose to power, and Christianity began replacing the Old Norse gods. The stories reflected these changes. The first written accounts, 12th century. By the early 1100s, Icelandic scholars began documenting their history. Two key works mark the beginning of the written saga tradition. Icelandbook, also known as the Book of Icelanders, and Landnambuk, the Book of Settlements, written by Ari Proglason between 1122 and 1133. Icelandbook provides one of the earliest written accounts of Iceland's settlement and introduction of Christianity. Meanwhile, Landnambuk expands on these details, listing major settlers and their lands. These texts signed a shift from oral storytelling to written historical record, laying the groundwork for literary sagas to come. The Golden Age of Sagas, 13th century. The 13th century marked the peak of saga writing. Many of the greatest sagas were written during this time. These stories blended historical events with poetic and supernatural elements, giving us the foundation of Icelandic literature. One of the most influential works from this period is the Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson. This text serves as a key source of Norse mythology, preserving the myths of Odin, Thor, and Ragnarok. As saga writing developed, more complex and dramatic works emerged. Njáls Saga is considered one of Iceland's greatest literary achievements, weaving a gripping tale of honor, revenge, and law. Meanwhile, Heimskringla, written by Snorri in the 1230s, connects Iceland's history with the border Norse world. These sagas weren't just records of the past, they were literary works that shaped the artistic and cultural identity of Iceland. The transition to new forms, 14th century. By the 14th century, the golden age of sagas was ending. But storytelling didn't stop. Instead, it shifted toward historical compilations, religious texts, and poetic adaptations. Sturlunga Saga, written around 1300, provides an intense look at power struggles among Icelandic chieftains. Biskupaksangur, or the Bishop's Saga, reflects the rising influence of Christianity, while Rimir, a form of epic poetry, repurposed older sagas into rhythmic, musical verse, keeping their spirit alive. The sagas in modern media. By the 14th century, the golden age of sagas was ending. The impact of these sagas didn't end in medieval Iceland. Their influence extends into modern literature, film, and pop culture. Now to skip ahead nearly 400 years, we start to break away from saga telling and put a focus on other forms of media, especially film. There are a lot of films about Vikings. A lot of films. 1876's Der Ring des Nibelungen, made by Richard Wagner, is an epic opera cycle based on Norse mythology and the Poetic Edda. There are two paintings I would like to highlight, both made by the same artist, Porain B. Porlaksson, and their names are Pingvellir and Thingvellir. They capture the iconic landscapes, reinforcing their connection to the land. The Viking is one of the first major Viking films, featuring early cinematic depictions of Norse warriors and their sagas. It's a movie I would recommend if you're okay with watching silent films and being a little confused sometimes. The Vikings is Hollywood's take on Viking lore, starring Kirk Douglas and heavily influenced by saga narratives. Horus, Prince of the Sun, is a Japanese animation which draws on Norse and Icelandic mythology, blending saga elements into its fantasy world. Vinland Saga, the manga and later on the anime, that was inspired by the Saga of Greenlanders and Eric the Red Saga, bringing Viking history to a new audience around the world. How to Train Your Dragon. While a children's fantasy, the series borrows elements from Norse mythology and Iceland's landscapes, keeping Viking themes alive in pulp culture, and also introducing the stories for children, as many of the early sagas are not suitable for children. Vikings, the TV show, created by the History Channel, while is most certainly a dramatized series, hits on some events from Heimskringla and Ragnar's Saga Labrukar, reintroducing saga characters to a modern audience. There were certain moments in the show which felt a little bit more like this than this. However, the show was still so popular, in fact, that it caused a large boost in Icelandic tourism. Whether Iceland is happy about that or not is another story, but I won't get into that. We also have Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is the first AAA game to really delve in and immerse the player in the Viking Age. Not only is it a great game, but it also came out with one of my favorite board games ever, Orlog. Does miss on some historical accuracies, still stays truthful to much of the sagas. These, while many of them great pieces of media, all centered around Icelanders and Vikings, were not created by Icelanders. So now I'd like to highlight some media from within Iceland, starting with Independent People, written by Hallodor Laxness, which is a Nobel Prize-winning novel, carries the saga tradition forward, portraying Iceland's harsh yet poetic rural life. Útlagin, or Outlaw the Saga of Gisli, an Icelandic film directly adapting Gisli's saga, staying true to its tragic tale of fate and exile. The Raven Flies, a Nordic revenge film with the saga-like storytelling, blending history with cinematic action. Now we have Icy, which was Iceland's Eurovision debut, marked the country's entrance into the global pop music scene. The synth-heavy track reflected the 80s evolving soundscape, showing that Iceland culture wasn't just rooted in the past, it was also embracing the modern world. Harpa, an artistic tribute to Iceland's culture and historical heritage, continuing the saga's tradition in visual form, which shares a name with the building Harpa, a building which many Icelanders would call the center of Iceland's art and music scene, and Breathe Normally, a modern Icelandic film that, while contemporary, carries the deep themes of survival and fate found in the sagas. Dyryd, or Lamb in English, a surreal Icelandic film blending folklore and horror, much like the eerie supernatural elements introduced in the sagas. This is also one of my personal favorite films on this list. Godland, a powerful film about an 1800s Danish priest navigating Iceland's harsh landscapes, echoing the themes of isolation, fate, and cultural clash seen in the sagas. From oral tradition to digital storytelling, Iceland's sagas have endured for over 1,000 years. They've shaped history, inspired art, and continue to evolve in literature, film, and even gaming. Whether through Njáls Saga, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or Godland, the spirit of these ancient stories lives on. The sagas are not just history, they're a living, breathing part of Iceland and the rest of our beautiful world. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.